Ladies and gentlemen, we give the floor to Dr. Muhammad Ali Al-Saggaf.
Can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yes, sir, we can hear you loud and clear.
Am I audible to you?
Yes, sir, we can hear you loud and clear.
All right, okay. Thank you very much for allowing me to share some of these ideas that are popping up on my mind. And a very good morning after Assalamu alaikum to everyone, dear esteemed professors, teachers, and students. Special thanks to the University of Southeast Philippines, Institute of Languages and Creative Arts, with special thanks especially to Prof. Sajid. Well, this is a great opportunity for me to share some of these ideas, as I said. I was asked to prepare a lecture on translation of religious texts, but I would like to twist a little bit the theme of this so-called sharing session rather than calling it a lecture. So I would like to add a bit of spices to it. So I call it a call for critique. Because delving into translation of religious texts, it is far beyond dealing with the strategies and methods, processing. So rather than delving into the technicality of translating these religious texts, I would like to take it into a different direction where it can open up our minds to think in a different way about these religious texts, and especially their translations. So to help with the flow of this sharing session, I will have divided it into 4 parts. First, I will talk about the key concepts, and then I will try to show the connection between translation of religious texts and applied linguistics, since the majority of our students here are from applied linguistics and translation. And then we'll provide some case studies of translation of religious texts and showcase their connection to applied linguistics. And finally, we'll try to conclude with some recommendations. So bear with me. This is not going to be a lecture rather than a sharing of some ideas, right? So let's start. As we all know, when we talk about translation, we are talking about this kind of process that simply everybody knows of, transferring meaning, right? So we are transferring meaning from one language to another. But to get into a more specific understanding of translation, let's consult the experts, those who were in the field of translation as the authorities for all of us for years now. So, for example, for Roman Jacobson refers to translation as interpretation. So the key word here is interpretation of verbal signs by means of some other language. Again, if we consult neither, then we get the phrase of closest natural equivalent, which I think all of you will agree with me, there is no such a thing exists between 2 languages. There might be some for an extent, but not exactly a natural equivalent. So neither uses the word closest. So it's not the typical one. It's just the closest. Every language has its own culture. And then for Catford, it's the replacement with the equivalent again. But what is common among all these academicians and all these experts is that the emphasis on the idea of proximity of transferring the meaning. So translation in general is transferring meaning from one language into another. And when we look into it from the perspective of academicians and experts, we see the feature of proximity is topping up the process. It is to ensure that whatever efforts you are making into translation, it will still be approximate translation, approximate transfer of meaning. So we cannot just call it a replacement as Catford would claim. We cannot say simply this is a replacement of a translation. So we are talking about translation in general so far. We've not yet talked about the translation of religious texts. We know the religious texts, they have their own characteristics. All right. So to understand it better, we go with the religious texts. And in terms of translation, when it comes to translation, we're not talking about religious text here from a religion perspective. We are looking at religious text from the viewpoint of translators. So religious texts are writings considered sacred or central to the beliefs and practices of religious tradition, and their translation involves not only linguistic transfer, as per the general definition of translation, but also interpretation of doctrinal, cultural, historical meaning. And all these are to serve one purpose, that is to preserve the theological integrity in the target language. So bear in mind, and please reserve this, that the translation of religious text is done to serve or to preserve certain thing. So there is a purpose, there is a function, there is a goal, there's an aim, all right? Just like anything we do, there is an aim of doing it, there is a function of doing it. But we need to focus on this particular point when it comes to translating religious text for a reason. So those religious texts are translated to serve certain purpose. Okay. This is necessary for us to understand the following logic. That is the problem statement of my sharing session today, right? So we've seen that according to those experts and academicians, translation outcome would be proximity of language transfer with an intention to keep the neutrality of the translation. But is this happening? Is this reality? Is this what we see? Is this what we have? I'm not going to talk about the process again. I'm not going to talk about strategies. I'm not going to talk about the skills required for the translation. This is the process. I'm here to talk about the outcome, the product of the translation. And in particular, since I'm talking about the religious text, I'm talking about the translation of religious texts. So the outcome of these religious text translation. So here the problem comes from the many versions of translation for one religious text. When we talk about religious text, we talk about one source, right? Like in Islam, we have the Quran. In Christianity, we have the Bible, and in other religions, there is one source text. So, question is, why is it there are so many versions of translations? This is a big question. So far, just talking about the translations of the Quran, the so-called translation, I like the quote that you used here when you were presenting the unscramble me again. The last question was, what was the untranslatable text in Islam? And that is the Quran. That really is a relief for me. So it helped me a lot in easing my sharing session today. So I think, and I believe that many of us agree that the Quran is untranslatable. So why it is untranslatable, and then there is over 100 different versions of translations. And these 100 different versions of translations are only in English, let alone other languages. There are many translations in other languages. So the question is, the source language is Arabic, the target language is English, yet we see over 100 different translations of the Noble Quran. This is a big problem. Where's proximity? Where's neutrality? So again, I'm not talking about the strategies, I'm not talking about the techniques of translation, the process of translation, but I'm here to share some ideas, some queries that are popping up in my mind. I've been in this field for over 2 decades, dealing with these issues of the so-called translations of the Quran. But then the question that I can't find an answer to is, why is it that we still have so many, a big number of translations of the Noble Quran? And the case is not only limited to Islam and to the Holy, the Noble Quran, it's also true to the other holy books like the Bible in Christianity and other religions. All right, again, this was not the aim of my session. We all agree that there is an endless debate of translation of religious texts in terms of translatability and untranslatability. But since you've already shared this during the fun time, the Unscramble Me activity that you shared, so that is a relief for me. Now, if this is not the case, we are not talking about the halal and haram, whether it is allowed, it's not allowed, or from just linguistic perspective, whether it is translatable or untranslatable, for the issues of equivalence, for the issues of different cultures, for the issues of many other things, terminologies, cognitive linguistic elements in both languages. Okay, let's not talk about this for the moment. I want to take you to a different direction. All right. So we want to see how to place the translation of religious text into applied linguistics. Well, according to Vermeer, the founder of the Scobos theory in translation, I quote here his exact words: each text is translated based on its intended function in the target culture. Meaning that translation is a purposeful activity. That means there is a goal. So what is the goal of these translations of the religious texts? So to better understand this, we need to look at a wider perspective. So let's consider religion and ideology as one of the purposes of the translation. So when there is a translation, there is an ideology. So this ideology has to do with what? It has to do with religion. So we have two things. We have religion and we have ideology. Some would say, oh, they are the same. But okay, let's see. Let's investigate further and see whether they are the same or they relate to one another. I've created this simple comparison just to show you the mapping, because I come from a cognitive linguistic background. We put high emphasis on mapping ideas from two domains. Just presuming that these are two different domains, religion and ideology, even though if we consider them as two separate domains, we come to a conclusion that they share the same thing at the very end. Okay, so as you see in this comparison, they end up with the central point of our discussion here, that in religion is expressed through sacred texts. So these sacred texts, quote unquote religious texts, is the way that religion is expressed through. In ideology, these are embedded in language and translation. So now we start to see the connection between the translation of religious texts, right, and ideology. So where can we see the presence of ideology and religion? Let's explore more. Religion is seen as a system of ideology. And this is also supported by Fairclough when he says, religious discourse is one of the clearest examples of ideology at work, as it naturalizes particular worldviews, legitimizes authority, and regulates behavior. So now we can see that religion can work as a system of ideology itself. And then also religion as a carrier of ideology. And this is very important. So these are expressed through ritual language, textual interpretation, and translation, all of which are ideological acts. So within these ritual languages, the textual interpretations and translations, we can see how these ideologies act. So it's very crucial for us to consider the connection between the translation of religious texts and the ideologies. Also, theological doctrines are ideological positions. What I mean by positions here is your stance from the theological doctrines. We know that in each religion, there are different ideologies. They all belong to the same religion, but they are following different ideologies, or in a more accurate terms, in different perspective or different view of the understanding of the religion, regardless of whatever religion they belong to. For example, here in Christianity, the Trinity isn't just a doctrine, it reflects a specific ontological view of God himself and power. So when these are translated or taught or challenged, ideology is in play. Religious discourse is often taken as a natural order of things. This is the issue. This is the problem, as Van Dyck highlights. So I think now you started to see what I'm taking you to. So I'm taking you from the translation field of religious text and taking them into queries. So to query them, to question them, we need to find a tool. That tool coming from the field of applied linguistics. So I want to show you here the connection between translation of religious text and the CDA. Who doesn't know CDA, the critical discourse analysis? Because critical discourse analysis is a proper mechanism that can enable us to see whether a certain ideology is being reinforced or being challenged. You know, the three-dimensional method of critical discourse analysis. We start with the text, and then the discursive practices, and then the social practices. How does it function? All right. So for the text, we need to know the words. We need to know metaphor and cognitive meanings. We need to know if there is certain constructions or the structure of the language itself. So we need to investigate the text. And this is exactly what we have in the translation. We are dealing with text. But unfortunately, most of the focus is only given to the text itself, the translated text itself. But there are deeper questions, deeper things that we need to think of, that we need to understand and question. Not only to ask questions, but to question. And I emphasize on this. So how to question it? We need to go to the next levels. When we go through discursive practice, so we need to question. Discursive practice is the processes. How is it produced? How the text is produced? And particularly for translation, because this is going to reveal interesting findings. I don't want to use other words, but very interesting findings about the discursive practices that are involved in the production of the translation of the religious text. So if we question who produced the text and for what purpose, and if we question what are the intertextual references, intertextuality is the influence of a text by another text. And then how is meaning negotiated by readers or listeners? This is going to reveal very, very interesting results if we are serious in questioning the numerous number of translations of these religious texts. And not only that, we can even go further and examine the social practices of these translations of religious texts. So, for example, and this is important, this is the key here, what ideologies are reinforced or challenged? Because we know, all right, we follow religion. So in each religion, we have different ideologies following different sectarians, for example. And I'm sorry to highlight this one, but this is reality we cannot run away from. So sometimes it is the ideology that is being reinforced or challenged for a purpose, to serve that purpose. And how does the discourse relate to social change or stability? Perhaps sometimes a certain translation of religious text is produced to help bring about a new social change, or on the contrary, bring stability to the society. So that means we need to go and open up our minds further. Okay, another question. What institutions or power dynamics are involved? Because if we come to know, we know why we have these massive number of translations of these religious texts. So looking at those three layers or three dimensions of the CDA and how we can apply them to translation of religious texts, this again reinforces the importance of Scopus theory of translation into our discourse. I mean, our discourse of translated text, translated religious text. All right. I hope I'm not taking you into theory, but what I'm trying to do is to really open up our minds into some new way of thinking and consideration for the translation of this religious text. So to make the idea clearer, I'm going to share with you some case studies. All right. Some of these case studies on the translation of religious text and ideologies. The first one, I've just randomly selected these two. So the first one is the sectarian ideology in Bible translations. The focus of this study is on how sectarian beliefs shape translation choices in key doctrinal passages. This study was done in mid of 80s by Beekman and Callow. They involved or they compare 4 different translations of the Bible. Now, what is interesting about this study is that, okay, it has gone through the 3 layers, the 3 dimensions of CDA, and it has revealed that translations of sacred text, that we call the religious text, are not neutral. So this is the challenge again to the proximity and neutrality of the translation. Right? So translations as an outcome of their study here shows that translations of religious texts are not neutral. They are shaped by the theological practices and serve to sustain the ideological framework of religious institutions. Right? They have highlighted so many examples. I'm just going to share with you one. For example, in King James Version of the Bible here, it says, and the word was God. And if you look at the spelling of the word God, it is capitalized, right? But in the New Testament, the translation was a bit different. So we will see, now this is the text level. We will see later the discursive practices and the social practices that has impacted the translation itself. So in the New Testament, the translation is, and the word was God. So is. Yeah, sorry. All right. Okay. So in the second translation of the New Testament, we see alteration of the meaning or change or call it whatever. I mean, it's a different version. So this different version comes with no more capitalized God and preceded by the indefinite article a. So why is this done? This is to subtly reduces the word logos, divinity, alignment with Jehovah's Witnesses, or the rejection of the Trinity. And the examples are so many. So we will know the reasons behind these discrepancies in the translations when we question the discursive practices. When we understand that translators who did these translations operate within institutional constraints. For example, certain societies, the Catholic Church, the evangelical publishing houses. So we know that there are certain situations or discursive practices or procedures that are involved in the outcome, right? Editorial board, readers from each denomination or sectarian expect text to affirm their theological worldview and so on. So there are many discursive practices behind this. And even if we take it further to the social practices, we can see more and more clarity of why is it so. And then we understand. I'll take, just to keep the session in balance, I would like also to share another case study from the Quran. So from the Quran, there is another similar study by Siddiq in 2015, where he traces the ideology of translating the Quran into English. CDA study of different translation cases across 20 different versions. So this study actually analyzes 6 ideological sensitive verses in the Quran, and then he compares these translations across 20 English versions. The involved translations were 6 different translations. These are considered among the prominent so-called translations, which is another debate I don't want to go through. The idea of untranslatability is very obvious now, we can see with those evidences. So, but I'm not going to talk about that. So this is another case study where it shows also similar outcome, where it shows that Quranic translation is not a neutral act. Again, so the point of neutrality or proximity is absent here. And this raises a bigger question. So why at all? If every translation is done to serve a certain ideology, then where is the real meaning? Is it possible to get the real meaning through translation? This is the big question. Actually, from the religious point of view, there are decrees and decisions made by Al-Azhar in Egypt with a solution for that problem already, but that was not adopted. But this could be also attributed again to the discursive practices and the social practices, maybe because of lacking money, lacking power, lacking this, lacking that, social status, dynamic powers, and many other factors that the Al-Azhar does not possess. That's why the viewpoint or the perspective on getting into the meaning of the Holy Quran in other languages is not has not seen the light yet, although it was in the early 20th century. Their suggestion was very simple: just come up with a brief, precise, and concise tafsir or interpretation of the Quran and do a translation of that interpretation of tafsir of the Quran, but not the Quran itself, which is very acceptable. I mean, from every single point, if you want to look at. So let's have a quick look over this result of this study, case study, and the or some examples. For example, here the third verse, which is a controversial or sensitive verse in the Noble Quran. So the translation variants include different ways of translation depending on the ideology of the translator. So, for example, one of the variant is "kill the polytheists." In the other translation, "fight the idolaters." And in the third is "those who fight you." So we can see now 3 different interpretations of the same text in the source. All right, this is one example. Why is it so? It is because of the translator's worldviews, affiliations, and intended audience. Also, another example here is the gendered reference, and this is quite interesting. You know, even for the Almighty Allah or God, quote unquote, God, in some of the translations they use he/she, and this is to account for the modern eras and post 9/11 and some political and geopolitical and socio-political issues. So we cannot see the translation that is neutral of these religious texts, including Quranic translation, which is by right should not be called translations at all. And yes, but unfortunately, what we see is an attempt of translation. These are all attempts of translation. But okay, it comes with all these consequences. So the outcomes or the translations that we have are actually results of those discursive practices and social practices, are results of certain ideologies, sectarian ideologies, gender ideologies, social ideologies, preserving or keeping stability of the society, or maybe controlling certain societies. So we see one or certain translations of the Quran are prioritized and given all the interest and given all the money support, while other translations are just buried in the darkness. So why is it so? It is for those reasons, as we can see. I'm not giving answers, by the way. I'm just trying to open up our minds for questioning rather than asking questions about these translations of the religious text. So just to conclude, I'm sorry I kept you for long. So to conclude, these are a few recommendations. When we look at religious texts, we have to recognize that these religious text translations are ideological practices. Number two, I would highly recommend students and lecturers, researchers alike to apply CDA in religious translation research as a robust framework that can reveal many interesting findings. And also, last but not least, this is my take on the issue is that we have to situate translation within the socio-political context all the time. A last word, final word, translating religious text is not merely rendering words from one language to another. It is reauthoring meaning. And please pay attention to this. It is reauthoring meaning. Okay. With that, I end my session for today. Thank you very much. If you have any question, you are most welcome. Thank you.
Terima kasih, Dr. Al-Saggaf, for that insightful discussion on the translation of religious texts. We now open the floor once again for questions and discussions. If you have any queries, please drop the Zoom chat or use the raise hand feature to be recognized. For our first question, sir, from Mr. Chris Ganato. Can a religious translation of religious texts maintain the level of sacredness as the original, even with ideological frameworks of religious institutions? I would also like to know your opinion if there should be a standardized approach to translating religious texts, or is there room for diverse interpretations in diverse languages?
Well, thank you very much for such a rich question. These are the types of questions that we need to hear. All right. So for the first part of your question, I would definitely, based on my humble experience, although it extends for over 2 decades, but I would say definitely there's no possibility to preserve the sacredness of the holy books, whatever religion you have. And to our surprise, why for certain religions there are strong or immense attempts to translate, while for other religions, they don't allow for translation. Look at the Chinese religions. They don't allow for translation. They have this sacredness. They preserve the religion in their own language. Why we have to translate our sacred books into other languages? This is not possible, but okay, now there will be this, we will come back to the debate. So what is your solution? Now, I'm not an Arab, I don't speak Arabic, so how do I know about your religious books? Okay, how was it spread in the early days, in the early years? How did it reach to you? They were not obliged to translate the Quran, but they were transferring the meanings and the values and the instructions in your language, and that's okay. Look at us. We have millions and billions of Muslims nowadays. It's not as a result of the translation of the Noble Quran, no. It's as a result of the efforts made by the early Muslims who translated and interpreted the doctrine and the, sorry, I shouldn't have used the word doctrine. They translating the Islamic traditions and the Islamic I would say instructions and so on. So this is the first part. There's no way that we preserve the sacredness of a religious text by translation, especially holy books. I'm talking about holy books that we believe they come from God, from Allah, Almighty God. All right. And this is also another point of debate where mostly is seen that the meaning of the original holy books is being deviated as a result of translation. It's not by if you cannot change the meaning of the original text, but with translation, through translation, you can bypass, you can, yes, you can let some ideologies or some visions or perspective of God himself even to be instilled within the translation, but you cannot do that within the original text. So this is the first part. As for the second part, is there any standardized methods or approach to maintain the sacredness of the translation? I would say, okay, partially this second part is already answered in the first part. So if we say there is no possible way to keep or to preserve the sacredness of the holy books or religious books through translation, then we shouldn't be talking about standardizing a way of translation. There will never be. Trust me, there will never be. Because within every religion, there are sectarians, there are different opinions, there are different ideologies. So each party will preserve their own. They will never allow. And you can see this in many examples in the New Testament, the Old Testament, even in Islam, we have this certain translations are given like as if they are the super duper translation, but they are just reflecting the ideology of certain school of thoughts. I hope I answered your questions, and please bear with me because I'm so passionate about this topic. So please bear with me if I lose my control.
Thank you, sir, for that insightful answer. So we can still cater questions from our participants. So you can just drop in our Zoom chat, or you can use the raise hand feature to be recognized. So we have here another question from Mr. Kaknyo. Should religious translations be revised periodically to reflect contemporary linguistic and cultural shifts, especially when different epochs can constitute different ways of having defined their reality, or thus this risk altering the original theological intent? To what extent should translation committees balance faithfulness to the source text with accessibility for readers?
Okay, another good question. This also again brings us to the debate again whether we can or we cannot linguistically in the first place and from the religious point of view. So if you consider both points, it's not possible. It is untranslatable. So the idea of revising is highly recommended periodically. It depends. But the point is here for the people who are, okay, please bear with me. The problem is that those who do not speak Arabic, the main source of understanding the Quran is through translation. And this is the big problem. So if you take ideas like jihad, for example, and those big and sensitive issues, right? So the translation may really relate negative interpretation of these ideas. So what I'm trying to say here is translating or dealing with religious text translation is not like dealing with other written texts, because this requires people who are specialized in these religious texts, because they are the best people to know it. So you cannot simply come as a translator and say, because I have the linguistic ability, I have the knowledge of the cultures of the two languages, I have this, I'm very well qualified, I'm certified translator, so I have the right to do a translation. I disagree, because if someone, let's say, now we are talking about translation, if a religious person comes and talks about what we are doing, about our strategies in translation, he or she does not have the right to interfere. So we have to respect specialization. People in this area say, okay, it is untranslatable because of the sacredness, because of the values, because of this, because of that. So we have to respect. And trust me, this is just based on humble experience. I know, and I assure you, if you do it yourself, you will discover the same thing, because it is logic. 1 + 1 = 2. We have one source and we have hundreds of different versions, and each different version has its own interpretation and understanding. So this understanding, when you read it, as your question is about the audience, all right, the audience will certainly be affected by the book they read, by the version of translation they read. So this will definitely influence their perception. And I think this is my answer in short. I think I took a lot of your time today. I'm so sorry. Apologies again.
Thank you, Sir Al-Saggaf, for that very informative explanation. Now we have another question here in our chat box. So from our participant, do you think translating religious texts changes the main meaning?
Okay, all right. This is different. This is a different context. If we talk about the meaning, this is good. So here, we're not talking about the transferring of meaning from one language to another. We are talking about the main meaning, the main message converted from one language into another. This can be done through interpretation and not translation. So we can have like on the margins of the holy text or holy book, whatever, we can have interpretation of that in whatever language, but we can never say. Now, the problem is if you take any translation of any religious text, you will see there is a text in the target language surrounded by explanation around the margin. So what is this? What is the value of the interpretation surrounding the text? If you have, or you already have the text. So the text is a translation, it's not an interpretation. This is our main concern. But when we shouldn't limit the term religious text to only the holy books, because there are other religious texts. For example, in Islam, we have the hadith, the traditions. We should not treat the way of translating hadith the way we treat the translation of the Quran. That's not the case. That shouldn't be the case, because the level of sacredness of the Quran can never be compared or matched to the sacredness of the traditions and hadith. Never. So in this case, yes, we can be more flexible for the translation, but we are talking about the words of Allah, the words of God. So this is a very sensitive thing. We cannot just simply call it translation. Of course, there will be a loss in the translation, in the process of the translation, and we can see the loss of the process of translation in the outcome. So when the outcome is as much discrepancy between those different translations, this tells us a lot. I know this is going to bring me a lot of debate, and many would disagree with me, but I'm just sharing my experience with you, and I'm opening the floor for questioning and not asking. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Saggaf, for that insightful answer. For now, for our last question this morning, we have from Ma'am Day Amar. So, if religious translation serves for a certain purpose, since there is power ideology in CDA, have you encountered this in analyzing religious texts based on your experience?
Oh, yeah, this is a very good question. Yes, of course, there are so many. But I don't think this is the right time and place to share these ideas. They have their own platforms. This is just to, as I said, this is just a session to share with you what I have experienced and how we must look at those religious, so-called religious translated texts. All right. But of course, there are so many, man, so many. You can select any so-called translation of the Quran, because this is what I do, and just try to compare it with another translation, and you can see. But you have to do a CDA, proper CDA, like you have to look at the discursive practices. That is first and foremost. You have to do the discursive practices question. That means you have to question who did it, when, why, what purpose they serve, what was the socio-political condition, why this particular translation was supported and other translations were neglected. So you can see, it's just like when politicians use religion to support their regime, it's just the same. So it's another tool for them. That is the religious translation. The translation of religious text is just another tool for them to stabilize the regime.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Saggaf, for that very informative explanation. So we love seeing so many insightful and thought-provoking questions from all of you. Your curiosity and engagement really make this discussion even more meaningful. However, due to time constraints, we will only be able to cater last question from Sir Sajad Mamalampay. Sir, you can open your microphone and camera, sir.
Am I audible po?
Yes, sir, loud and clear.
So, I have a question, sir. So, this pertains to how do you navigate the tension between fidelity to the original text and cultural sensitivity, particularly when the original text may contain language or concepts that are problematic or offensive to modern audience. So, how do you navigate that, sir? Do you have any strategies or specific tips on how do we convey particular language to suit somehow our modern audiences?
All right, thank you very much, Sir Sajad. I got your point. A very brilliant question. But the point here is that when we handle those religious texts just like other texts, this is the problem. So we can agree on several mechanisms as to how to approach those discrepancies and deviations and any other issue when we consider normal or manly produced texts. But we are talking about divinely produced texts. So this should not be treated as the same. If you notice, I just made a distinction between the translation of the Quran in Islam and the translation of the Hadith or the traditions of Prophet Muhammad. So it is so agreeable among people of religious people, so-called religious people, or ulama. All right, that there is no comparison. There's no way to compare the Noble Quran to the Hadith. All right, and there are different layers when we talk about Hadith. So there is Sahih, there is I don't know. There are other layers for that one, but the Quran is only one. All right, and it's all coming from the same source. So we should not treat these religious texts as we deal with other types of texts when it comes to translation and when it comes to investigate or navigate through these fidelities of the process of translation. This is very important, very crucial. I'm not here going to give any strategies or steps or particular, let's say, methodology into the type of investigation, because it depends on what kind of question you are raising, or in a better way, how you want to question the so-called religious text in translation.
Thank you, Dr. Al-Saggaf, for that insightful answer. And with that, we officially conclude our open forum session. Once again, a heartfelt thank you to Dr. Al-Saggaf for sharing his invaluable knowledge, and to all of you for your active participation. Your enthusiasm and engagement truly made this session a success. Let's give Dr. Al-Saggaf and ourselves a virtual round of applause. Feel free to drop a clapping reaction in the chat box. So we look forward to more insightful discussions ahead. So as a token of our appreciation, we would like to present a certificate of recognition with the same citation to Associate Professor Dr. Mohammad Al-Saggaf for his invaluable contribution to this lecture series. Dr. Al-Saggaf, we truly appreciate your time and expertise. To officially commemorate this moment, we will now have a photo opportunity. We kindly ask Dr. Al-Saggaf and all participants to turn on their cameras and flash their best smiles. Our technical team will take the screenshots in 3, 2, 1. All right, once again, thank you, sir, for being with us today. Let us give him a virtual round of applause.
Thank you very much. Thank you, really.
As we